Hi, everyone. Can I ask you something personal? Have you ever started doing the inner work, the mindset shifts, the daily practice of trying to align with a better life, and then looked around and realized that some of the people who used to be right there beside you were gone? Maybe it was a friendship that slowly went quiet. Maybe it was a relationship that used to feel unshakable that suddenly had nothing left to say. Maybe it was colleagues, family members, people you thought would always be part of your story, and nobody warned you that this was coming. Nobody told you that this quiet, sometimes painful disappearance of people from your life is actually one of the clearest signs that your manifestation is working. I learned this through Bashar's teachings, and it changed everything about the way I understand relationships, frequency, and the life I was building. If you have ever felt confused, guilty, or even heartbroken about losing people on your journey, stay with me. This one is for you. Hit subscribe if you are new here and check the description below for the books that changed my life and a free PDF about equal hours. There is a moment that happens on almost every genuine transformation journey, and nobody talks about it enough. Nobody puts it in the manifestation books or the law of attraction courses or the morning routine videos. It gets skipped over, glossed around, quietly avoided, because it is uncomfortable, because it is painful, because it does not fit neatly into the version of spiritual growth that looks like nothing but abundance and joy and everything falling perfectly into place. The moment I am talking about is this. You start doing the work. You start raising your vibration, shifting your beliefs, aligning with the life you truly want. And then you look around and realize that some of the people who used to be a constant, solid, seemingly permanent part of your world are no longer there. Not always dramatically, not always with a fight or a falling out or a clear ending point. Sometimes it happens so quietly that you almost miss it. A friend who used to call every week stops reaching out. A colleague you felt genuinely close to starts feeling distant, like you are speaking different languages. A family member who was always present begins to feel like a stranger. And you are left standing there, wondering what happened, wondering if you did something wrong, if growth is supposed to feel this lonely, if maybe this whole journey is costing you more than it is giving you. I want to start here, in this moment, because I think it is the most important and most overlooked part of the entire manifestation conversation. And I want to say something clearly before we go any further. If this has happened to you, if people have disappeared from your life as you have grown, you did not do anything wrong. You did not become a bad person. You did not push anyone away, and you are absolutely not alone. What you experienced is one of the most consistent, most predictable, most universal aspects of genuine vibrational transformation. And once you understand why it happens, through the lens of what Bashar teaches about frequency, reality, and human connection, it stops feeling like loss and starts feeling like confirmation. I remember when this happened to me, when I made the decision to leave the financial and insurance world behind, to stop selling my time to a system that was never going to give me the freedom I was looking for. The external shift was obvious. New schedule, new work, new financial strategy, new daily reality. But the internal shift was something else entirely, something deeper, quieter, and far more profound than any career change. And as that internal shift happened, as my frequency genuinely began to change, I started noticing something in the relationships around me. People I had worked alongside for years, people I had considered close friends, people who had been fixtures in my daily life. They began to drift, not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily, undeniably like a tide going out. Some of those driftings hurt. I won't pretend they didn't. There were friendships I genuinely valued, connections I had assumed were built to last, relationships I thought were strong enough to survive any version of me. And watching them quietly dissolve as I stepped into a new frequency was disorienting and sometimes, honestly, heartbreaking. But here is what I did not understand at the time, what I only came to understand later through Bashar's teachings and through the clarity that comes with distance and growth. Those disappearances were not failures. They were not signs that something had gone wrong on my journey. They were not proof that transformation was too costly or that the life I was building was somehow incompatible with love and connection and belonging. They were frequency shifts made visible. And in the world of finance, a world I know intimately, we have a concept that maps perfectly onto this experience. It is called portfolio rebalancing. When your investment goals change, when your financial vision evolves, when you move from one season of wealth building to another, the assets that served you in your previous season are not always the right assets for your next one. Not because they are bad assets, not because something went wrong with them, but simply because they no longer match where you are going. And a smart investor does not hold on to misaligned assets out of loyalty or nostalgia or fear of the empty space they will leave behind. A smart investor recognizes the misalignment, honors what those assets contributed in their season, and makes the conscious decision to rebalance toward what is truly aligned with the next chapter. Relationships work the same way, and I know that might sound clinical for something as intimate and emotional as human connection, but bear with me, because understanding this at a structural level is exactly what allows you to move through it with grace instead of guilt. The people who have drifted from your life as you have grown were not mistakes. They were not failed relationships. They were not proof of your unworthiness or your inability to maintain connection. They were reflections, accurate, perfect reflections of the frequency you were vibrating at the time you called them into your reality. And as your frequency shifted, as your internal world genuinely changed, the reflection naturally updated. This is not abandonment. This is alignment in motion. And the most important thing I want you to take from this first part of our conversation is simply this. The disappearance of certain people from your life as you grow is not a side effect of your transformation. It is evidence of it. It is the external world catching up with the internal shift you have already made. Which means that every relationship that has quietly dissolved as you have done your work, every friendship that faded, every connection that simply ran its course, was not the universe taking something from you. It was the universe making room. And in our next block, we are going to look at exactly how this works, at the mechanics of frequency and reality that Bashar describes so beautifully, and why understanding this at a deeper level changes not just how you see the relationships you have lost, but how you see every single person currently in your life. So now we have established something important. The disappearance of certain people from your life as you grow is not a sign that something went wrong. It is evidence that something went very right. It is your external reality beginning to reflect the internal shift you have already made. But why? How does this actually work? What is the mechanism behind it? This is where Bashar's teaching becomes genuinely fascinating, and I want to break it down in the simplest, most practical way possible, because this is one of those concepts that can sound complicated on the surface, but is actually incredibly intuitive once you see it clearly. Bashar explains that every single person you experience in your reality was essentially called there by you, not consciously, not deliberately, but vibrationally. Your frequency, the sum total of your beliefs, your emotions, your dominant thoughts, your energetic state, acts like a signal, and that signal attracts people, circumstances, and experiences that are a vibrational match to it. Think of it like a radio frequency. If you were broadcasting on a particular frequency, you only receive the stations that exist on that same wavelength. You do not hear the stations above or below it, not because they do not exist, but because your signal is not aligned with them. Change the frequency, and the stations change. The old ones fade out, new ones come in clearly. Your social reality works exactly the same way. When I was deep in the financial and insurance world, stressed, overworked, vibrating at the frequency of obligation and survival and quiet resentment, the people around me matched that frequency perfectly. We bonded over long hours and office politics and the shared exhaustion of a life lived on someone else's terms. Those connections felt real and solid because they were. They were a perfect match for where I was vibrating at the time. But as I began to shift, as I started doing the inner work, changing my beliefs about money and freedom and what was possible for me, my frequency changed, and the signal I was broadcasting started attracting something different. New conversations, new opportunities, new people who were talking about consciousness and abundance and building life on their own terms. And the old connections, they did not disappear because those people changed. They faded because I did. Now, here is the part that I think is most important to understand and most liberating. Bashar is very clear that this does not mean the people who left your reality are not real. It does not mean they do not exist or that they do not have their own full, rich, complete lives happening independently of you. They absolutely do. What it means is that the version of them you were interacting with, the specific dynamic, the particular connection, the way that relationship existed between you was a co-creation, a vibrational agreement between two frequencies that were, at that time, aligned. And when one frequency shifts significantly, the agreement naturally dissolves. Not with malice, not with failure, simply with the quiet, inevitable logic of energy seeking its own level. I had a client once who came to me in the middle of a major financial and personal transformation. She was building her first real investment portfolio, leaving a corporate job that had paid well but cost her everything, and genuinely stepping into a version of herself she had always known was possible but never quite trusted. And she was doing it beautifully. Every external indicator was pointing toward real, lasting change. But she was also grieving the friendships that had gone quiet, grieving the social world she had built over years inside a version of herself she was outgrowing. And she kept asking me, is it supposed to feel this lonely? And I told her what I know to be true from my own experience and from everything Bashar teaches. The loneliness you feel in the middle of a frequency shift is not a destination. It is a transition. It's the space between the relationships that matched who you were and the relationships that will match who you are becoming. It's the portfolio in the middle of a rebalance, temporarily holding less than it will, making room for what is coming. That space is uncomfortable, but it is also sacred because it means you have genuinely changed, and genuine change always reorganizes the world around you. Which brings us to the specific question most people are afraid to ask out loud. Why do certain people disappear completely while others stay? What is actually happening in those moments when someone simply vanishes from your reality as you grow? That is exactly what we are going to explore next. So we now understand the mechanics. Your frequency shapes your reality. The people around you are vibrational matches to the signal you are broadcasting. And when that signal changes, when you do the genuine, deep inner work of transformation, the cast of characters in your life naturally begins to shift. But here is the question that I think sits in the heart of most people going through this experience. Not the philosophical question of how it works, the deeply personal, sometimes painful question of why certain people specifically disappear, why some relationships survive a frequency shift and others simply do not, why some people grow with you and others seem to vanish almost overnight. Bashar's answer to this is both simple and profound. Some relationships in your life are built on a foundation of genuine resonance, a deep, flexible, evolving connection that can stretch and adapt as both people grow. These are the relationships that survive frequency shifts, not because they are immune to change, but because the connection itself is rooted in something real enough to evolve alongside you. These people do not need you to stay the same in order to stay connected. They meet you at each new frequency with curiosity and love rather than resistance. But other relationships, and this is the part that requires real honesty, are built primarily on shared limitation, on mutual agreement about the ceiling, on the comfort of two people who have silently agreed not to outgrow each other. These are the connections that were born from a specific version of you, the version that was still carrying the inherited beliefs, still vibrating at the frequency of survival or obligation or quiet resignation, and they require that version of you to remain in order to continue. When you change, when you genuinely raise your frequency and step into a new version of yourself, these relationships have nothing left to hold on to. Not because the other person is bad or wrong or limited, but because the vibrational agreement that created the connection no longer exists. I saw this so clearly during my own transition. There were colleagues I had spent years with, people I genuinely liked, people I had shared real experiences with, who simply could not connect with the version of me that was emerging. Every conversation started to feel like I was translating between two different languages. The things that used to bond us, the shared complaints, the mutual exhaustion, the collective agreement that this was just how life worked, no longer resonated with me. And without that shared frequency, the connection had nothing to stand on. And I want to be honest about something because I think it is important. Some of those disappearances were mutual. As I changed, I also stopped reaching out as much. I stopped initiating conversations that I knew would pull me back into an old frequency. And that is not something to feel guilty about. That is discernment. That is the conscious, loving choice to honor your own transformation, even when it means allowing certain connections to quietly conclude. Because here's what Bashar teaches that I find most liberating about all of this. You are not abandoning anyone by growing. You are not betraying anyone by changing. You are not responsible for keeping yourself small so that others can remain comfortable. Every single person in your reality is on their own journey, their own frequency, their own path of expansion. And the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for them is to be fully, authentically, unapologetically yourself. Because when you show up at your true frequency, you give everyone around you permission to do the same. The people who are meant to be in your next chapter will find you there, not the diminished version of you that stayed safe and familiar, the real version, the expanded version, the version that finally had the courage to change the frequency. And the people who needed the old version, they did not lose you. They simply completed their season with you. And somewhere in their own reality, they are continuing their own journey perfectly, exactly as they should be. Which brings us to the final and most practical question of all. Now that you understand why this happens, what do you actually do with it? How do you navigate this process without losing yourself in guilt or grief or self-doubt? That is where we're going to land, and I promise you it is more peaceful than you think. Here we are, the final piece. And I want to start by acknowledging something real, because I think it matters before we talk about anything practical. Losing people hurts, even when you understand the mechanics, even when you know intellectually that the disappearance is a sign of growth and not failure. Even when every spiritual teaching you have ever encountered tells you that this is part of the process, it still hurts. And I think it is important to say that out loud, clearly, and without apology before we talk about how to navigate it. Because the goal here is not to become someone who is so spiritually detached that relationships no longer touch you. The goal is to become someone who can feel the loss, honor what was real, and still keep moving forward with clarity, with grace, and with genuine trust in what is coming. So, what do you actually do when people begin to disappear from your life as you grow? The first thing, and Bashar is very clear about this, is to resist the urge to chase the old frequency. When a relationship begins to fade as your vibration shifts, there's a very natural, very human impulse to close the gap, to shrink back into the old version of yourself just enough to keep the connection alive, to tone down your growth, soften your expansion, make yourself smaller and more familiar so that the relationship has something to hold on to. Do not do this. Not because the person is not worth it, not because the relationship did not matter, but because contracting your frequency to preserve a connection that is no longer aligned is one of the most expensive trades you can make, energetically, emotionally, and in terms of the life you are trying to build. In financial terms, it's like liquidating a high-performing asset to prop up one that has already run its course. It costs you twice, once in what you give up and once in what you fail to gain. The second thing is to release with gratitude rather than resentment. This is something I had to consciously practice and, honestly, still practice on the days when the grief shows up unexpectedly. Because it's easy when a relationship dissolves to slide into a story about what went wrong, who changed, who failed, who should have done something differently. But Bashar's framework offers something much more freeing than that story. It offers the recognition that every person who was ever in your reality served a purpose, perfectly, exactly as they were, for exactly as long as they were there. They were a reflection of a version of you that needed that connection at that time. And honoring that, genuinely thanking the relationship for what it was, without needing it to be something it can no longer be, is what allows you to release it cleanly, without the energetic residue of resentment or regret that can slow down what is coming next. I have a small personal practice that I use whenever I feel the grief of a faded connection. I simply say, internally, "Thank you for the season you gave me. I release you with love." It sounds simple. It is simple, but the energetic shift it creates is real, and it keeps the heart open instead of closed, which is exactly the state you need to be in to receive what is aligned with your new frequency. The third thing, and this is the one that I think matters most in terms of your manifestation and your financial journey, is to trust the space. When relationships leave, they leave a space, and that space can feel uncomfortable, even frightening, especially if your sense of security or belonging was tied to those connections. But that space is not empty. It is not a void. It is potential. It is the universe clearing the channel for the relationships, the opportunities, the abundance that are aligned with the version of you that is emerging. Every time I have allowed that space, every time I have resisted the urge to fill it immediately with something familiar and instead trusted that what was coming was worth waiting for, I have been met with connections and opportunities that were more aligned, more nourishing, and more genuinely supportive of the life I was building than anything I had released. That is not coincidence. That is frequency working exactly as it should. So if you are in that space right now, if you are navigating the quiet, sometimes lonely in-between of a genuine frequency shift, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not losing. You are rebalancing. And the most abundant, most aligned, most genuinely connected chapter of your life is not behind you in the relationships that have faded. It is ahead of you, in the frequency you are becoming. Trust that. Stay the course and keep raising your vibration, because the life that is waiting for you on the other side of this transition is more than worth every relationship that needed to complete its season to make room for it. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of this video. It truly means the world to me, and I hope this conversation brought you something real, something you can carry with you starting today. If this resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel. We have so much more to explore together. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. You never know whose life you might change with a single video. The books that have shaped my journey and that I personally recommend are all linked in the description below. Go check them out. They are worth every page. And don't forget, there is a free PDF in the description on how to interpret equal hours. Grab yours. It is completely free, and it might just change the way you see the signs the universe has been sending you all along. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one.